So one is figuring out how to make more money or enough money to have both your lifestyle met and savings. That's one. And then two, controlling the expense side. And then three is investing. And a lot of people figure out one or two of those, whereas wealth creation happens when you get all three right. And I use the example of my father, where he totally nailed the first two, where he made enough money, he was very responsible with his expenses. He had like a perfect credit score. He like was, he had savings, but he didn't understand investing at all, and didn't trust the stock market, didn't know how to invest. And so after decades and decades and decades, he never grew his wealth. It was always just kind of this linear thing.
Yeah, got it.
And I apologize for noise. There's some construction
No,
happening
that's
right
okay.
there.
That's okay. Yeah, I think that's an important point. What I want to ask you is, for anyone listening to this who maybe they're thinking about, they have a rental property, they have some money in the stock market, but they don't really pay attention to how they should position themselves or invest for the next 10 years. What would be like the simplest piece of advice? Would it be getting more education? Just investing in your own knowledge and education, or would it be a specific investment to think of? What would you say to someone listening to this, maybe driving in their car, they're thinking about getting their first rental property, if they can save up for it, maybe they have something in the stock market. What would be their next move for the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think one is make sure you're able to get incomes doing things you like to do. That's number one. And that could either be concentrating on a profession that earns well, or diversifying. You can have a day job and you can have a side hustle. So there are different ways to do it depending on how you want to approach it. And then another aspect of that is, I think, having a basic understanding of global macro. And that sounds intimidating, but for example, I try to put it in plain English, and that's been part of why the website's been successful. Is I try to take complex subjects and just kind of teach it like I would at a high school level. And I learn along the way doing that. And it's funny because I even get like institutional investment managers that say, I like your article because it's in plain English. Like,
it makes sense. Yeah.
And the reason I say that, so there's like quotes from like Warren Buffett and others, and or Peter Lynch, that say like, any second I spent on macro was too much. But that's often because they were in this like, this period of kind of, one, American exceptionalism, and two, structurally lower and lower and lower interest rates. So assets just keep going up, and you're like, well, why would I care about macros? Stocks go up, real estate goes up, everything goes up. So as long as you stick to a couple developed markets, things just go up all the time. Why would you spend any time on global macro? And the catch there, and I think part of what caught people off guard these past couple years, aside from obvious kind of like extreme events, is that they just weren't students of history. And I do think that, both financially, socially, politically, it's important to be a student of history to a degree, right? So not everyone has time to be, one of the same, an expert in history. But I think global macro and history are in some ways kind of the same thing. And so that's why, even if you're not super into finance, it's worth understanding. So I think it's worth every person understanding the long-term debt cycle, credit cycles, kind of what money is shifting, what is a global reserve? Like, when sovereign countries have foreign reserves, what does that mean? I think those things are worth knowing, because these are things that underpin what we consider money, and how markets work, and how, geopolitics work, and how domestic politics work. It's all interlinked, and how kind of social movements change, and how there can be periods of extremes on the right or the left. And so it all ties together. And so one of my pieces of advice would be to understand, at least on the basic level, global macro, because I think we're in a decade where global macro matters.